That was mine. Sorry. Joe Durham. Did you know Joe Durham? You know Joe Durham. Pittsburgh.
He's a big jig guy.
When we first immigrated, he was the star football quarterback. But it was over here in Pittsburgh. Yeah, because that was the year that she it's really, really nice. And he did our years. And then he's just been harsh. So 10 years.
You got mom home this afternoon. Good. That's good. Other than I had their neighbors. None of the council. Oh, thank you.
A very good.
It's the same number.
That was zero.
Yeah.
Mr. Messi.
Yeah.
Good. How are you doing?
You ready for cold weather?
I'm ready for the weather.
You're ready for snow next week.
Is that what's supposed to come next week? I'm ready.
He's been here.
I'm ready.
Of course, now it won't happen. I said. That's the curse. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I mean, I know.
Are we here?
It's almost like they do. He said he's 5 minutes away. Yeah, I texted him 2 minutes ago.
Well, let's call us to order then. This is a special meeting of the Town of Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners. Tonight, the 13th day of December, 2022, and we are gathered here primarily to hear a presentation about the rate study that we're looking forward to greatly. And perhaps it would be a good thing to go around the table and introduce ourselves. Colby, would you start, please?
Colby Sawyer, I'm the earnest manager and PIO for the town.
Pamela Baldwin, Commissioner.
Cindy Perry, Mayor.
James Vose, Commissioner.
Kyle Ship, Commissioner.
Jay Farrell, Commissioner. Thank y'all for coming.
Hazy Wazit, interim town manager. Jordan Johnson, police chief.
Gary Bailey, counselor.
Good evening, I'm Charles Archer with Friesen Nichols. Thanks for having us.
Kent Jackson, Town Engineer.
Emily Smith, Teresa Nichols.
Richard Campbell, Friesen Nichols.
Sam Adams with Friesen Nichols.
Thank you very much. Are there any introductory remarks that need to be made before we hear your presentation? We're waiting for one more commissioner, but that is,
Yeah, we missed.
We have utilities manager for Sanford, Vic Czar, and our intrepid reporter from the Chatham News, and then the other gentleman is, yes. Thank you. I think we can go ahead and start with the presentation. And Kent, have you, would you like to make some introductory remarks?
Yeah, sure, briefly. So, thanks for coming together. This, as we know, started back in the summer with this board, as well as the Sanford City Council adopting resolutions of intent to consider a possible merger scenario for the water and sewer utilities. And that toward late summer, we entered into an agreement with Freeze to do a two-phase study of potential merger And so tonight, Charles and his team are here to give us the update and their findings on that first phase of the merger feasibility review. So we did earlier today, this afternoon, we visited with the Sanford City Council. Very great hospitality by those folks to hear this same information. So with that, I will turn over to Charles for the bulk of the presentation.
Thank you, Kit. Again, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for having us, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with the town of Pittsburgh. We enjoyed working with you on this project as well as a number of other projects and working with your staff. Very much appreciated. I know we introduced our team, but the project team working on this is Emily Smith, Rich Campbell, and Sam Evans, along with myself. And so I'm gonna give the bulk of the presentation this evening. Feel free to keep it informal, ask me questions along the way, and we also entertain questions at the end. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide.
The good thing with part was just make sure we speak into the microphones because it can be a little hard to hear on the screen.
Does that help?
Should be good.
Okay. All right. As Kent just said, the purpose of this overall project is to evaluate the potential merger or regionalization of the water and wastewater utilities between Pittsburgh and Sanford. We have completed phase one of that effort. We are under contract for 2 phases, but we can't start phase 2 until both you all, as the Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners and the Sanford City Council, both say, yes, we want you to go to the next level. So that's kind of why we're here this evening. And so we're presenting the results of what we found with phase 1. And we'll go through that this evening. So this is the project scope. It's divided into 2 phases. And the first phase is really to develop an order of magnitude financial impact on Pittsburgh and Sanford, looking at for a 5-year forecast to try to give you an idea of how big of a ballpark are we talking about of a potential merger between your 2 systems. And the 2 areas that we're looking at are system development fees. That's the fees that new development would pay to connect to your utility systems, and the others of water and sewer rates that your ratepayers, your customers, your citizens pay today. That's the 2 revenue streams that pay for utilities in almost every community in North Carolina that has a system. So that we're presenting that kind of high level order of magnitude financial picture this evening. And then phase 2, if everyone agrees, we'll get into more detail or deeper dive of looking at the 2 systems, the operations and maintenance, look at some of the other evaluations like with Western Intake Partnership, the reclaimed water contract with 3M, the bulk water agreements that you have with some other developments in the county, the system interconnections with Sanford and Pittsburgh, and also system development fee collections in the various authorities, how you can make that work between being a merged system that's 2 separate municipalities. And also we'll look at what the scope of work calls governance evaluation. That's essentially identifying what are the key issues that's important to Pittsburgh and important to Sanford that you all need to agree upon before you enter into some type of formal agreement. So what are the key things that you need to be satisfied with representing your respective communities? The other piece is looking at developer agreements that have been executed and how do they in fact affect the financial picture involved with this. And then finally developing a comprehensive financial model that will show you long-term or at least out in the foreseeable future what your water, wastewater rates might need to be and what your system development fee rates might need to be. So that's kind of an overall picture of what both phases are. Any questions about any of that? Next slide. So this, I know it's hard to see. Don't worry about the details of what's up on the screen necessarily, but earlier this year, we had completed a project for the town of developing a 20-year capital improvement program for both your water system and your wastewater system. Part of that was done for, we completed the report for system development fees. You know, that's the fee that there's a state law that was passed, I believe, in 2017 that kind of standardizes the process that all utility systems in the state and their communities, how they calculate the fees that you can charge new development for their impact they're going to have on the capacity of your water and wastewater systems. So at the heart of that process is developing a capital improvement program. And the law allows you to develop a CIP as much as 20 years out. You can go less than that, but 20 years is the maximum. So what's up on the screen right now is for the water. And let me make one other comment about that. When we develop a CIP, it's hard to know what things are going to cost 20 years from now. We don't know what they're going to cost next week. You've been through a bidding process. It's a dynamic, changes all the time. So the further out these projects are, the more or less reliable those numbers become. You have to continue to update them as you get closer to executing those projects. So for example, this water, just the water improvements for the next 20 years, when we did this, completed this report back in the spring of this year, it's $380 million in the next 20 years. And we're going to focus on just a small portion of those this evening. Next slide. And this is a slide that shows same thing, but on the wastewater side, looking out 20 years. And again, the same comments about the reliability of those long distance numbers apply here as well. It's again hard to predict what those are, but this is just shy of $190 million on the wastewater side. And so when you combine those two, the water and the wastewater, you're looking at about $569 million for both of those. And so that's a big push for any community. It's a particularly big push, big effort for the town of Pittsburgh. Next slide. So for this first phase of looking at a high level financial analysis here, we had to make some assumptions. When we get into phase two, if we get into phase two, we'll dig deeper into some of those details, and that information just gets more refined as we do that. But this screen here reflects the assumptions that we're making. We're looking at for 5 years. We feel like that's probably about as far as you can expect to look into the future and have reliable data on what costs might be for capital projects as well as for operating expenses. So we are making assumptions that your expenses and your revenues, your customer base will grow at about 4% over the next 5 years. The system development fee report that we prepared for the town and submitted earlier this year allows for the town to charge up to $38,000 per new lot that comes and ties into the town's system. So we're making an assumption in doing this analysis that you would levy that level of the fee, $38,000, and that over this 5-year period, at least 500 new units. You'll see the term ERU, that comes straight from the statutes. It's equivalent residential unit, essentially a home, be that a house, a townhome, whatever. And there's a calculation for commercial property, how that works as well, because it's a little bit different the larger the meter gets, but it's based on meter size, 3/4 inch meters for each residential unit. And as we go through this analysis, we're projecting on some of the capital projects, the most immediate needs that the town has, that you would undertake trying to finance those, pay for those within 10 years. And actually, what we're going to suggest is you can pay it off quicker in less than 7 years. And the reason for that is this is just the first wave of capital improvements. It's $122 million when you get to that third bullet up there of that's kind of at your doorstep today. This Forcemain project that you've recently opened bids on is about $55 million. to pump the wastewater from Pittsburgh to Sanford. The water plant expansion project that you're a partner with Sanford and Chatham County and Holly Springs and Chickwave Arena. It's $37 million roughly for the town's 3 million gallons capacity in that plant. And then the water transmission to get that water from Sanford to Pittsburgh is about another $30 million. And that's actually the cost of getting the water, estimated cost of getting the water from the Moncure mega site where VinFast is being constructed or will be constructed to Pittsburgh. That economic development project is paid for that water line from Sanford's water plant up to essentially old US Highway 1. And then the fourth bullet, it's the least or the smallest of the numbers up there, but maybe the most important one as you all think about the future of Pittsburgh. Is what are you going to do long term with wastewater? You have a pretty good handle on what your water needs and where the sources might be for the next several decades between interconnection with Sanford and the Western Intake Partnership with the new plant being built on Jordan Lake. It will provide the needed water that Pittsburgh will need for the next several decades to continue to grow and prosper. The flip side of that, once you treat that water and you consume it and use it, you've got to dispose of it on the wastewater side. And based on the report that we did on your capital improvements, we're projecting by, I think it's 2042, you'll need about 10 million gallons of wastewater disposal. Today, the town has less than 2. The Forcemain will provide 2. So what's the future? What's the next step? And this will be this planning, this $325,000, the planning to figure out what are your options for your next steps and what might those costs be and all the things associated with that. Also, I would add to it that we're trying to take a very conservative approach in estimating these numbers. If we go to a phase 2 and we come back to you, we hope to show that maybe these numbers are going to be something smaller than what you're seeing tonight. So we're trying to give you hopefully a worst case situation in this part of phase 1, but keep it reasonable as well. Again, this slide is hard to see, but this Pittsburgh's capital improvement program for water and wastewater for the next 5 years. And the first 4 lines on that are the 4 projects that I just described. The Forcemain to Sanford, the water plant expansion in Sanford, the water line from Sanford, and the wastewater long-term planning. If you look at the second column from the left, that says funding source, you'll see that next to those 4 projects, it says L. That means a loan. You're financing those improvements. That $122 million would be financed. The remaining projects on this sheet where it has C, you pay with those cash, essentially your cash flow that you have from your operating expenses and revenues each year and or grant funds that the town may get over time. So we're really focused on those 4 lines, top 4 lines. That's the $122 million that would need to be financed to pay for these capital improvements. Next slide. This is a budget that we are, based on the assumptions, we're talking about 4% growth in revenues, 4% growth in expenses over the next 5 years. We put this in a budget spreadsheet for you, and you'll see that lines 4, 13, 16, 23, and 24 are highlighted or shaded. And the reason being we want to focus on those in the comments this evening. So if you look at line 4, for example, that's the line for the system development fee revenue. That goes back to that calculation. If the town imposes a system development fee at $38,000 and you build 500 homes a year for the next 5 years, it'll generate $19 million in revenue for the town to help you pay towards the capital improvements that are needed. If you look at line 13, that's the new debt. That's borrowing the $122 million. And you'll see that that's about a little over $16 million a year in debt service. That's based on a 10-year amortization. So that it would be paid off in 10 years. But if you look at, add to that line 16, it's entitled System Development Fee Available for Debt Retirement. What we are suggesting to you all is that you pay down, there's going to be about $2.8 million left over after you pay your $16 million in debt service from the system development fee revenue. Take that $2.8 million and apply it to paying the principal down, so that that loan will be paid off in less than 7 years. Again, that's a very conservative approach, but the reason being is there's another wave of capital projects coming behind these first four. It's going to be probably equally as expensive. The other is system development fees. The way the law is written, you have to update those at least every 5 years. So we don't know 5 years from now what the system development fee might be. Is it going to go down? Is it going to go up? It's going to change significantly. So we're trying to take a conservative approach. And the other part is when, assuming this all were to happen, you're going to have to go to the local government commission with the financial package and get their approval. And they're going to expect a conservative approach to this as well. And also the rating agency that rates your indebtedness, your bonds, would like to see that as well. And so that's the reason that that's there. And also we've contributed showing in line, we did not highlight it. And mine's so small I can hardly see it. I apologize.
I think it was 19.
Yeah, line 19, yeah, which is building a reserve. That's the kind of the rainy day fund, unrestricted net assets that when emergencies happen, you have those funds if something happens to take care of those problems. If you look at line 23, that's the rate increases that would be needed. And keep in mind, under this model that we're showing you, system development fees are paying for your big capital projects. Your rates that your existing payers and your new customers would only have to go up a small amount. As you see, the way this model is built, you'd have to go up 15% and 23, 24, 0 in the following year, 0 the following year, and then about 2.5% in year 4 and 2% year 5. We also on line 24 said, well, let's levelize that and spread out those increases over a 5-year period and assume that at 2% a year. So rather than having those ups and downs for your ratepayers, they have a predictable 2% per year.
I'm referring to the slides that were sent to us. And I'm seeing rate increase needed of in 22, 23, 0. 23, 24, 0. 24, 25, 0. 25, 26, 0. And then in the last 2 years, 2.78 and 2.21.
That was updated since last week. We've continued to refine the model since last week.
Okay. Did we receive that?
Yes.
We did this morning.
Oh, this morning. Okay.
Over here.
Sure. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
So again, this is based on the premise that you'll set a system up at or around $38,000 to pay for your capital improvements. And then having, minimum rate increases to cover those cost increases that you have in operating the utility system every year. Labor goes up, insurance goes up, utilities go up, chemicals, et cetera. Those cost of doing business just changes from year to year to be able to absorb those costs and help your ratepayers have a better idea of what to anticipate year in and year out with this and separate that burden, the capital on the new development and the rate increases on just the operating expenses.
Charles, just real quick, the way that you're able to annualize that 15% to 2% is just adding ratepayers over those years.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not
Correct, Rich?
That is right on the 15% portion. On the 2% slide, on line 24, we actually went and included the rate increase. So 2% this year, we went ahead and included that 2% increase for the next year and so on and so on. So it's cumulative on that slide. On that slide, line, on line 23, though, the first rate increases, those are just for each year snapshot. That's what it would take for that year. So that's not a cumulative on that year.
Okay,
That's not.
okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So again, I know I keep saying this, but it's really, really important. System development fees will pay for, under this model, the capital improvements that are needed, that $122 million that needed to be invested. Typical operating costs would be absorbed into the rates that the ratepayers pay month in and month out in their water bills. If you choose not to implement a system development fee or something, let's start at that point. This next slide gives you an idea of what you'd have to do to your rates. So next year, you have to raise your rates 335% to make up that for that $38 million. I mean, yeah, $38,000 or loss of $19 million of income. And you know that's not practical. It's just not practical. And this chart is not a cumulative chart. If you delay it a year, that's what the second bar is. Your ratepayer base is growing at 500 people a year under this model. But none of these numbers are really practical. But we showed this to you to give an idea of what the burden is to your ratepayers versus the burden on system development fees, as you all think about how to move forward with this. So that's the reason for this slide, and that's something that wasn't in the presentation draft that was prepared last week either. Next slide, please. This is a slide that shows a side-by-side comparison of your current water and sewer rates on an average monthly bill versus Sanford's. And if you look at the kind of the fourth line down, you'll see that Pittsburgh's average bill for residential customers $115 roughly per month. And in Sanford, it's about $59 a month. So if you were to adopt a model like we're suggesting this evening, it will stabilize. You've had rate increases over the last 2 years for your ratepayers. It'll stabilize the rate of those increases to what we're talking about, to something that's manageable for the typical homeowner. 1%, 2%, 3% a year, whatever it might end up being in that. And so that you'll have that stabilization that Sanford has. They have the economy scale. They've got 20,000 customers. You all have 2,000 right now. So it makes the math awfully hard to work, to be honest with you, as you're trying to make these. You've got a lot of capital improvements that are needed, and it's hard to put that burden on 2,000 ratepayers to pay for it. It really is. So that's why we think the system development fee is probably the best alternative for you all to consider. So it offers an opportunity for you all to stabilize your rate increases for the future, and at some point in time, reach rate parity, so that what the customers are paying in Sanford and the customers in Pittsburgh are paying are be basically the same. Give you an example, you all are probably familiar with 20 years ago, the city of Raleigh, with the towns in eastern Wake County, that was Rollsville, Wake Forest, Garner, Zebulon, Knightdale, and Wendell. They merged their utility systems. But it's taken 20 years to get to rate parity with some of those. I don't think they're quite finished with all of them. But the difference was having to pay off some of those capital projects to make the improvements for those interconnections for the capacity that was needed for those communities to continue to grow. So it takes a while to get there, but you do get there, if that's the point. So it's so that's the reason that we show you this slide, that there is a difference, that your ratepayers are paying about twice as much as a ratepayer in Sanford today. And hopefully you can stabilize that and over time bring it down. Next slide. So just kind of recapping some of the key considerations that you all need to be thinking about as you contemplate this opportunity is, again, setting your system development fee at or near $38,000, assuming there are 500 housing units built a year. That'll retire the capital investment that you need in 10 years or less. And if you start in 23, 24, it will be paid off in 10 years. And what we're suggesting, you probably get paid off in a little bit less than 7 years. It's putting the responsibility for paying those capital costs on new development and leaving the cost of just those general minor increases in year in and year out operating utility just on your ratepayers to keep it down to 1%, 2%, 3% levels, as we discussed earlier. Other things to think about that without a merger, you know, the town applied for a $30 million construction grant from the Division of Water Infrastructure back in September. And there's a condition on that grant application. You can only get $30 million assuming it's awarded if you merge, if Pittsburgh and Sanford agree to merge. If you don't agree to merge, you can only get a maximum of $15 million. So that would take $15 million off the table if you don't proceed there. The second piece is with the Forcemain to Sanford to their wastewater treatment plant. Your bids was low bid was about $55 million or so there. That's to pay for the cost of the infrastructure that's needed for that. That does not include the $7 million that's needed to pay Sanford as part of your agreement for the capacity charge for that 2 million gallons of treatment capacity. So that could potentially come off the table in a merger, because it's a merged system. It's all part of the family, so to speak. And the other thing to think about too is that if you don't merge, wholesale rates will probably be different than what non-wholesale rates are as a wholesale customer buying water or paying for wastewater treatment. You would expect something less from a non-wholesale rate. Next slide. So kind of the conclusions for you all to think about is, you know, we've got working on the left for Pittsburgh to think about and for Sanford. So for Pittsburgh first, obviously, I know this is, I keep beating the same drum, but the system development fees are critical to make this model work, to be able to pay for your capital improvements. It does give you an opportunity to stabilize rate increases for your existing ratepayers and future ratepayers. That'll lead to eventual rate parity with the ratepayers in Sanford. It gives you opportunity to take care of these short-term capital needs, get those paid off in a quick amount of time. The way I like to describe it, you have the beach, you've got waves always coming in. Some are larger, some are smaller, and that's your capital projects. They never go away. That's the thing about operating a utility system. It takes constant investment. And that's, they'll never go away. It's just how much changes from year to year. But probably most important is that fourth bullet. It provides the long-term wastewater solution for Pittsburgh. Again, projecting out to 2042, you've got to find some way to treat and discharge 10 million gallons of wastewater. Based upon the growth projections that are in place for the town. That's not likely the Hall River. It's not large enough to be able to accept that type of flow. Which means likely would have to go to the Cape Fear. That's where Sanford's wastewater treatment plant already discharges. So you would be going, if you were to build your own plant, you most likely would have to discharge it on the Cape Fear and you'd be going right by their system. Why not partner with Sanford to address these long-term needs? And it's kind of already been demonstrated with the water plant expansion project in Sanford. There are 5 local governments participating in that, and that's driven the cost per gallon down for everybody. It's saving everybody money in the region by working together. And you know, that's kind of a change that it was discussed at the Sanford Council meeting earlier today, is that, you know, decades ago, the way cities and towns grew is you did everything on your own. You created your own utility system, your own treatment plants, even had your own landfill. Environmental regulations change, the market changes. You can't afford to do that. You are not allowed to do that anymore. And that's kind of this change here, the opportunity is to create this regional system. It's been done a number of places across North Carolina and across the country. And it works, so that you can still control your destiny to grow and manage your growth. But do it at a more affordable and fair opportunity for your ratepayers and for the development community as well. For Sanford's perspective, why would they want to do this too? It doesn't have a direct impact on their ratepayers. On this first phase of analysis that we've done. But it does create that economy of scale that they've already seen with, for example, through the water plant expansion. The more folks participating, the more ratepayers are, the cheaper it is for everybody. So it creates that economy of scale for them. That's good for Sanford and it's good for Pittsburgh and everybody in their system. It provides that built-in partner for the future for the whatever's going to be next for wastewater. Sanford's going to either have to expand their own wastewater plant or build a new one in the future. So you all need to do the same thing. So that creates an opportunity to do it together. And then it also, Sanford's is already that position of being the provider for wastewater for water for the region through this water plant expansion, serving Chatham County and potentially serving Pittsburgh, Holly Springs and Fuquay Varina. It would be doing the similar thing on the wastewater side. And the other point is, I'm sure you may have heard this, the State Department of Environmental Quality, they really encourage regionalization, realizing that it's hard for smaller towns to operate utilities. It's expensive. And it's very difficult for the ratepayers to keep up. So having a regionalized system, makes DEQ look a little bit more favorably on communities that participate in that. And that's a good thing. So then the last slide is, for us to move forward to phase 2, both Sanford City Council and you all need to say, move on to phase 2. Otherwise, it's funded through the contract. But you all need to just tell us, because if you're not comfortable with where this is, we didn't want to waste your money going any further. So that's why the scope of work was designed this way, to give you an idea of what the ballpark from a financial perspective is. And so once you tell us to go, we'll go. If you tell us not to go, we'll sit tight. And I'm happy to try to, or we're happy to try to answer any questions that you all might have.
Questions for the team? I guess my first one is there any jurisdiction that has a system development fee of that magnitude?
I don't know what all the others are, but I guess would be probably not. But I don't know for sure. I don't know if there's a database anywhere that shows what they are across the state.
And the assumptions that you showed of cost are all loans. So any grants we receive would reduce that number,
Yeah.
correct? And then
This is kind of trying to give you the worst case conservative scenario. Grants would obviously cut off the bottom. If you get the $30 million grant,
right,
that 122 becomes 92.
right. And then theoretically reduces the system development fee in this model.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, it has an impact all the way around.
Yeah. What is the projected capacity over 5 years? I think it would be 5 million water and 2.5 to 3.5 million sewer available in Pittsburgh, I guess.
I don't know that I have those numbers with me.
Because the water line is 3 million,
Correct.
right? So
Yeah,
that 2 plus 3.
as I recall, the water line is 3 million gallons, and that would provide enough water to western intake comes online, if that becomes the next solution, if that is the next solution, which is not till 2030, 2032, somewhere in that 8 or 10 years from now. So then you can just look at your way. You've got 1 MGD from your plant plus 3, that's 4. So your wastewater will be something a little bit less than that.
Or I guess 0.75. What you said 1 MGD, what
From your existing plant,
water,
yes.
but it can do 2, right?
You
Because
average,
it's right now, it's running at about 0.8 or so.
yeah, you
I guess
average
you're talking
daily.
about the available. what you're
Right,
talking
yeah,
about.
what the average daily is running a little bit less than 1 million gallons a day.
Yes, yes.
So.
Okay.
So you add that to the 3, you're using up 4 million gallons of water between now and the western intake comes online.
Okay, okay. And then on the sewer side, we'd have the 2 million gallon force main, 500,000 gallons at the Chatham Park or Sanford
Right.
Water Recovery Center. And then we can go somewhat over 2 million gallons in the force main
Right, yeah, that would,
in theory. We'll talk about that later.
yeah. we'll talk about something
Tonight.
Yeah,
Okay,
and that's the part of the capital project, the figuring out the long-term wastewater is really probably your most critical need
Mhm.
from a planning perspective.
Further questions?
Will the phase 2 study show a projected timeline of rate parity? Or is that still just too hard to determine?
I don't know yet.
Okay,
I don't know, Rich, if you have an opinion, but
We could get there, it's. Because as you shift the burden for all your capital costs, most of your capital costs, your growth capital cost. To the new customers coming in. Really gonna water that down as you really grow your rate base, you add another 20,000 customers or so to your. Rate base there to where you're really hitting just your maintenance, capital items, and then operating costs is not linear, so they're not going up at the same pace that you're adding customers.
Mhm.
So you're gonna start shifting rates down. We'll be able to hit a decent timeline. We won't nail it.
Sure,
I'm sure
sure.
of that, but we'll give you a better picture of what's happening once we'll do that. Yes.
okay, good. And I think it might even be helpful to say it won't happen for at least X years to kind of set those expectations.
Yes.
great point.
And then, I mean, obviously, like the mayor said, the SDF is large or is projected to be large. So I'm also interested in, and this may not be in the scope of that study, but somebody else, I don't know, like, some methods that we're allowed to use to alleviate that for things like affordable housing or infill development or some of those other priorities that are going to be particularly impacted by infield. I mean, just affordability obviously would be affected by such a large
Exactly. They're
SDF
important points.
overall. So, if we have any ability or, methods to work around that, like we know we can't do things with property tax, for example. So any incentives and things like that we could also build in for priorities.
It's also interesting to think about what I guess the effect of merger would be when the SDF were updated in the future. I don't know what we know or could, project about that, but that is a thought that has come to my mind as far as, this SDF being, very large. But then in a merge scenario, it's going to have to be updated at least in 5 years. And then I guess what goes into that, so to speak, changes at that point if the system is merged.
So we might want to look at a scenario of a significantly different SDF in future, is that what you're saying?
That's my thought
Mhm.
is, what might that be?
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I like looking at different scenarios. And that brings me to my question, but I don't want to interrupt Commissioner Ship.
If I can just follow up on that from what you said, I think that would be a question too, and that might affect the timeline of the merger is how long, if we merge, say in 2 years, are we still allowed to use that rate study in SDF for 3 years past that time of a change of the organization? Or, is there a part of this merger that would compel us to redo that study and change the SDF?
That's part of the phase 2 we talked about. There's one of the bullets talked about system development fee / authority.
Mhm.
That's looking at, you've got 2 separate systems and the ability to charge. Sanford has their own system development fee analysis been completed, so it's obviously a different rate than yours. So how do you maintain and manage those 2? And may be part of how, what is the structure, what does the structure of the merger look like from a legal perspective? So there's a lot of different ways to be looking at that as you move forward.
Okay, yeah, because I think this analysis is built on obviously a higher SDF in Pittsburgh
Yes.
than in Sanford.
Yes.
So we need to be able to maintain that throughout the merger or some method, you know.
This one didn't really give us a chance to look at economies of scale after the merger. You know, kind of did. Sanford's costs are what they are, Pittsburgh's costs are what they are.
Mhm.
The second phase would look more at the drilling down the economies of scale if we went ahead and combined the systems.
Okay, sure.
I have just one question. I may be ahead of the cart, but how is Pittsburgh as a distressed utility or distressed municipality? How is it going to affect us through this?
I mean, that's a really great question, and that's part of the incentive of right now for the $30 million grant application.
Right.
That's what makes you eligible for it. And so the state is encouraging. So I think part of this process is having conversations with DWI about how else can you help make this happen.
Mhm.
You know, if we've developed this model, you know, they can form their own opinion about how prudent it is. But realizing that this is an opportunity to get Pittsburgh off the distressed utility list. It is the goal here, and the state wants to see that. And that's why they put these incentives in place to help provide some additional funding. So that would eventually be an outcome that no longer be distressed. But it would help get some of this capital cost paid for, hopefully, during this temporary time of being a part of the distressed utility program.
And is there a time limit on that distressed municipality? How, no time limit?
No, and so week before last, Hayes and I met with DWI and we asked that similar question. And their response is that they have not had a jurisdiction to come off of the distress, so they don't have a gauge, so to speak, for how long it lasts. They're kind of working, you know, kind of as they go, honestly,
Right,
is
'cause
what
it's a
they
new-
said.
It's unusual.
Right,
Only been involved in a couple of years,
Yeah.
correct?
that's
Okay.
right. I mean, their only advice, you know, they encouraged us to, you know, take advantage of the additional, you know, funding opportunities, you know, as long as we remain in that designation.
Thanks.
So with financial projections, I very much appreciate a conservative approach. But from my understanding of our circumstances, I'm wondering if the more conservative approach might be to have maybe a more realistic growth factor in the calculations. I think we're going to grow a lot faster than 4% per year. And frankly, that's what concerns me. And I'm not sure how the SDF factors into that. I don't have an intuitive grasp of that yet, as compared to the proposed rate increase. So would it be possible to have a scenario that maybe focuses more on the projections that Chatham Park investors have presented? Or have you even received any such?
We have preliminary information from Chatham Park on that. But part of it too is trying to anticipate what the local government commission is going to expect. It's one thing when you go to borrow money and you're pledging to either raise taxes or raise rates, something that the town has complete control over. You don't have control over what the development market's going to do.
Sure.
But Pittsburgh is in a unique position that you do have Chatham Park. Most communities don't have that out there. So it's a little bit different situation. So it's somewhat uncharted waters from that perspective.
Well, and some might see that as a circumstance of abundance, but I'm seeing it differently because I believe that the costs are going to outweigh the tax revenues because it's predominantly residential development. And so I believe that's the more conservative approach, is to hew more to growth projections that are in line with what we've already got approved in entitlements.
What we'll do in this next phase, the phase 2 portion, we'll look at it more on an individual customer basis, where we're looking at it bigger picture.
There we
For
go.
this analysis,
Yeah,
we'll have the data that we can tie in, and we'll actually be able to spot grow as opposed to the whole town inside the
Terrific.
park. So that next phase.
that's
we'll
very
include that.
reassuring to hear. Thank you.
It's just, it's a whole lot more detail. It's a whole.
Oh,
lot
yeah.
more work to load it
I
in
get it.
for this first phase to
Get it.
get you the answers fast enough.
Yeah, and I just real quick. Did 4% annualized off of a 2,500 customer base, because I think we're around 2,400. 2,300.
2,100.
Yeah. 21, 2,200.
Okay. Well, so. I've started with 2,500 and I got to 3,000 in 5 years, so. That does not seem like what we're expecting. I mean. We're gonna have 500, 600 new units in the vineyards. Later next year. Is that right?
Well, I mean, what I can share is some preliminary number estimates that Chatham Park has shared with us is potential build out of the North Village in 2033 and potential build out of the South Village in 2050. Of course, you know, those are estimates that are, far out in the future. So, they'll fine tune, of course, as we go through time, but that's what they are projecting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about the approvals we've already issued, and I think it is, I have the number 600 in my mind for the vineyards area. And that's not the whole of the North Village, right?
That is not, in fact, I don't even think that's regarded as part of North Village. It's subdivisions north and west is what they call it.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, the North Village is on top of that. But the number, I would need to confirm the numbers. I mean, the magnitude of what you're saying, 600 sounds pretty accurate, but
Yeah. And I had pegged in my mind that was in the next 2 years. A year ago, I had it pegged as 3 years, so I think that's soon. And yeah, so like I said, that feels more conservative to me because of the costs of having that much growth. But like I said, I haven't embedded in my intuition that the higher SDF that may play a very significant role. So I'm appreciate this information. Look forward to the conversation proceeding.
I think that's a good point, though, John. Like we're saying in here that this study is saying 500 units a year for SDF, but that's more than 4% a year growth for ratepayers. So I know that'll shake out in the second half. I think the harder thing to predict for this is the demand for growth outside of the PDD, because there can be no growth right now, but this merger will allow growth outside of the PDD. So we don't know what that pent up demand outside of the PDD is, which is another way of this study being conservative if we have more units outside of that PDD. But our higher SDF will temper that demand also. So it's that's why I pay you the big bucks, I guess, to figure that out. But I say, we should plan on some growth outside of the PDD, because that's a huge purpose of this merger also.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be very helpful to have some greater understanding of the context of this SDF compared to the averages in the state.
My guess, Commissioner, is exponentially, maybe not exponentially, a number of fold higher than anywhere else in the state. I don't know that for sure, but I've heard talk of $10,000 and $13,000 SDFs. 38.
That's right. That's more of the order of magnitude typically.
But I guess I want to make a couple points too. One of them is right now, Chatham Park, because their system is brand new, wastewater treatment plant system is brand new, it's very, very efficient, and they get a credit off of the SPF. And Charles, we've been talking a lot about the SPF. I think the smarter move is to go to the meter charge, and I'm assuming really for, I guess, discussion purposes. So in many ways, those are interchangeable in that you're not necessarily saying it's got to be an SDF, it can be a meter charge. I guess it's a fair statement.
Well, it has to be an SDF. Because
It has to be an
that's
SDF.
what the law allows. That's the only vehicle that you have.
But it could be based on meter size instead of
Based on
Yeah.
meter size.
allocation.
Okay, but it's still called an SDF. though, for
Yes,
meter
but it-
size base. Okay.
Yeah.
The report is based upon a 3/4 inch meter for a residential unit.
Okay.
And that's based on the capacity that's available in that 3/4 inch meter. And that's how, there's only one system in the state that I'm familiar with doesn't do it that way. And they do it based on house size, which can get very cumbersome to administer. Trying to figure out, 1,000 square foot house pays this, 1,500 pays that, and manage it over time with additions and all that stuff. Everybody else is using meter size. And because that's, what size meters the town uses, it's standard specifications. And it's just simple to administer. And it's fair for everybody.
And I guess to me, I think about the SDF, whatever number, which we all know is big. But, I walked at Greenway, I did it this evening, there's houses going up. And they are knocking them out.
They sure are.
And in my mind, I think, can't we, we need more revenue, right, to make this practice nut. And I guess I wonder if phase 2 is imminent and we're gonna roll, but this is gonna take a couple of years, there's gonna be 1,500 houses out there or some number. I would rather see us strike at some level while the iron's hot to get some amount of cash flow in our coffers to help, time is not on our side, I guess I would say. And the other thing that's interesting to me, and I guess this will be a part of phase 2 as well, it's super impressive what Stanford's doing. They must be running a very efficient system. But if we merge, and y'all are able to run our system more efficiently than we are, right? I would like to see some of that efficiency not all go back to Sanford and their smart people, but to be shared, whether that's retiring debt service or even possibly reducing rates. I guess to me, that should be all part of this methodology that as we go forward, because y'all are running your system at 50% of the cost that we're running ours. Now, there's lots of mitigating circumstances in there, but I just think as we go through this, let's put that in our brains too, whether we pass it on to the ratepayers, we reduce it, pay off the debt quicker, right? But we are kind of making conscious decisions going forward.
And Hagan, I think that's part of what drives you to rate parity eventually as well. It just what you're talking about, that helps your customers get to that rate parity.
What's the timeline for phase 2?
Once we get notice to proceed, about 90 days.
So how might we derive some estimates, commissionership for numbers on affordable housing and let's just say an advantageous downtown policy, infill development policy as regards the SDF?
I don't know. I mean, the first question is if we can do it. I suspect it's something like we have to have a separate fund where we would pay the SDF.
Rebate.
So I think it's sort of separate. I mean, the magnitude of it will affect that, but I suspect that we would have to have other sources of funding and then pay the SDF if that's what we wanted to do.
the state law allow for rebates?
What's our we call them a rebate? We call it something else.
Okay. I thought we'd have been instructed to call them rebates.
You would take with one hand and give with the other.
Okay. All right. What shall we call this for the sake of conversation?
You haven't even seen the SDF study. You haven't even considered the SDF study. You're getting the cart before the horse. This issue is on the super, or mostly the utility merger system, which assumes an SDF rate of some amount. But you haven't even considered, or seen their study on that. So I think we should see that first, make that kind of determination. If you're going to strike while the iron's hot, like Hasten suggests, then you need to go ahead and do that irrespective of this. Because you're going to have a long time between now and the time of the merger. That you could have 1,500 houses or 600 houses or whatever you want to do. So you need to think about the SDF as a separate issue. I think. And it really doesn't necessarily impact the merger issue. Because if you have an SDF of 38,000 and you do merge, then there's a question about whether you can still charge an SDF for a Sanford utility system. I don't think you can. So, those are issues that have to be resolved. So the 38,000 is not a panacea. You also have to figure out how you're going to borrow $122 million.
And I think functionally, the SDF is set in the budget, correct? And would be changed by a budget amendment?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have we can do that as needed, and maybe soon.
Sanford at their meeting voted to consensus to proceed. Or is the next step with Sanford to send out a notice to proceed letter? But I guess the question is, what do you need from this board to feel good about the next step?
Board as a whole needs to tell us to move. Sam, we have consensus from the city council. This is a contract with the town of Pittsburgh. And so we need the town to instruct us to go to phase 2.
I'll make a motion to proceed to phase 2.
It's a workshop.
Isn't? I guess I have to adopt the agenda. Or, okay.
But that brought confidence.
Yes.
And everybody shook their head yes or said yes, we do think it's appropriate. They didn't take a formal vote, but they
messing with it.
did say, we want to take the next step in this. So I think that's the question at this point.
Would the board like to do the same procedure with respect to that? I don't think so.
Yes.
Yes? Jay Farrell?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we have unanimity.
So thumbs up.
Yes.
Proceed.
2 thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. Great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to next steps.
We do too. Thank you.
So before we leave though,
Our agenda that we skipped over that we need to address, and it requires a vote, which would mean we would have to open the meeting, vote on the budget amendment. You guys have to vote, and then we can close this meeting. So the budget amendments, was from Heather. Dated today, this budget amendment would cover the cost of freezing nickels doing the hydraulic analysis of the town Forcemain to Sanford. This would be an analysis to determine the potential of the system, which was originally designed by Connie to MTD. being able to come in up to 5 MTU, the cost of this analysis is $6,270. Actually requested is that they adopt the attached budget ordinance, amending the fiscal year 2022-2023 operating budget to appropriate additional funds from the fund balance to cover the analysis of the town Forcemain to Sanford.
Do I hear a
So-
motion?
Well, I want to ask quite a process question. I'll vote on this in a heartbeat and vote in favor, but we're in a workshop. I understand votes are not allowed in workshops. But we're needing to tidy up this matter.
Yes, so what we would need to do is go ahead and vote on the agenda that was sent out. Then you can go, which would then open it up, and then you could vote on the budget amendment and then close the meeting with the agenda.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm just. Please forgive me, friends, for slowing this down just a moment, because I'm told that I received this by email. I didn't. I'm now hearing that there's an agenda. I'm not seeing it. So,
It was posted today. Or it was posted last week, actually, I think.
We added the budget amendments yesterday, and then it was reposted this morning, and I emailed it to all of you.
I'm thinking my email is not working. I tested it 30 minutes ago and I'm not receiving.
No, I didn't get it either.
It's not in your SharePoint as well,
It's in SharePoint.
but
I have a,
emailed it. Do you not get emails through SharePoint? Because
I do not.
I email them to the staff as well.
I do not.
Yeah, I got it.
And I have an auto forward rule from my town email to Gmail. And so
That could be.
I did.
Because it was all in one, it was all in one package. Well, did you receive yours? Understand, did you? You did receive yours.
It may be something if you're forwarding it, your town email to Gmail, that might be something.
Well, in any event, what we need to do is to adopt the agenda that was the stated agenda for today. So may I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Shipp. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Vose. Those in favor, please indicate by stating aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And you've heard the stated budget amendment submitted by our Finance Director, Heather Meacham. Is there an approval of her budget amendment?
So moved.
And second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin, seconded by Commissioner Bonnets. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Is that complete?
I just want to clarify something from the memo too, that it's not only to analyze if it will do 5 million, but it's to suggest improvements if needed to handle 5 million. So it's those two things.
Are we adjourned or or are there additional questions that need to be asked on a person-to-person basis or in public session? Okay,
Yeah, I think we can adjourn.
all right. And will you make that motion, Mr. Bonnets?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Bonnets,
Seconded.
seconded by Commissioner Vose. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.